I'm 87 years old, and my phone hasn't rung in 3 months. Not a wrong number, not a telemarketer, not even one of those robot voices telling me my car warranty is expiring. Nothing. 3 months of silence from a device that works perfectly. I know it works because I called the phone company, stood right here in my kitchen, dialed the number, and told the young man on the other end that something was wrong with my line. He checked everything, ran his tests, came back and said, "Sir, your phone is functioning normally. There's no issue on our end." No issue on their end. The issue, it turned out, was on mine. The issue was that in 87 years of living, I had managed to eliminate every single person who might want to call me. And I didn't do it with cruelty exactly. I did it with something worse. I did it by being right. I spent 34 years as a federal judge. 34 years where my word was literally final, where people stood when I entered the room, where I decided what was true and what wasn't, what was just and what was not. I was good at it. I was very good at it. I was never reversed on appeal, not once. I was respected, I was feared, and I was right. About everything. And now I sit in a 4-bedroom colonial house in Virginia where the only sound is the furnace clicking on and off. So let me tell you what being right costs.
I need you to understand what kind of man I was, not what kind of man I thought I was, what kind I actually was. I graduated first in my class from Georgetown Law in 1963. Clerked for a circuit court judge who told me on my second day, "Crawford, you have the finest legal mind I've seen in 20 years, and the warmth of a filing cabinet." I took it as a compliment. That should tell you everything. I was appointed to the federal bench in 1972. I was 35, youngest judge in the district at the time. Over the next 34 years, I presided over more than 4,000 cases. I sentenced men to decades in prison. I separated children from parents. I decided who kept their money and who lost it. I held people's entire lives in my hands, and I rendered judgment, and I was almost always correct. My colleagues called me the Hammer, behind my back mostly, but I knew. I didn't mind. In a courtroom, certainty is a virtue. Decisiveness is strength. You don't waver on the bench. You read the law, you apply the facts, and you rule. Doubt is a luxury judges cannot afford. The problem is, I never took off the robe. Not really. I wore it to dinner. I wore it to my daughter's dance recitals. I wore it at Christmas, at funerals, at my children's weddings. Every room I entered became my courtroom. Every conversation became a case. And every person in my life eventually became a defendant. My first wife, Catherine, she married me in 1966 when I was still a young attorney. She married a man who was ambitious and confident. What she got, over 12 years, was a man who corrected her grammar at dinner parties, who told her she was wrong about movies, about politics, about how to raise our children, who interrupted her mid-sentence to provide the accurate version of whatever story she was telling. December of 1978, she was telling a story at a party, something about a trip we'd taken to Maine, and she got the year wrong. She said 1974. It was 1975. And I corrected her, in front of 8 people, calmly, precisely, the way I would correct an attorney who'd cited the wrong statute. She looked at me. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just looked at me with this expression I have spent 45 years trying to forget. And 3 months later, she filed for divorce. I didn't understand. Not then. I told myself she was too sensitive, that she couldn't handle being married to a strong man. That was my ruling, and I didn't revisit it for decades. Here's what 87 years in an empty house finally taught me. The first thing, being right is a weapon, and you are pointing it at the people you love. I want you to think about the last argument you won with your spouse, the last time you proved your point. You probably felt satisfied for about 15 minutes. Maybe you even felt righteous. You were right after all. The facts were on your side. Now I want you to think about what happened next. The silence afterward. The way they looked at you. The way they turned away and did something else and didn't talk to you for the rest of the evening. That silence is a withdrawal, and you might not notice one withdrawal. You might not notice 10, but they add up. They accumulate interest like a debt you don't know you're carrying. And one day the account is empty, and the person you love is gone, and you're standing in your kitchen wondering why the phone doesn't ring. My second wife, Diane, she was brilliant. A professor of literature at Georgetown. A woman who could talk about Faulkner and Dostoevsky in ways that made you see the world differently. She was the most intellectually alive person I ever met. And I spent 8 years dismantling her. Not deliberately. I want to be clear about that. I didn't set out to diminish her. But every time she offered an opinion about something outside her field, politics, finances, how to discipline the children, I treated it like a motion to be argued. I'd ask her what evidence she had. I'd poke holes in her reasoning. I'd present the counter-argument as if I were addressing a jury. And then I'd render my verdict, which was always that I was right and she was wrong. She told me once, in 1989, about a year before she left. She said, "Silas, talking to you is like being cross-examined in my own kitchen." I told her she was being dramatic. That's what I said. She was being dramatic. She left in 1990, took almost nothing. She said she didn't want anything that reminded her of me. 8 years of marriage, and she wanted a clean break. No alimony, no fight. She just wanted to stop being overruled in her own home. That should have taught me something. It didn't, because I was still the judge. And the judge is never wrong. The second thing, there is a difference between respect and fear. And I never learned it. In my courtroom, people stood when I entered. They addressed me as Your Honor. They measured their words carefully. They deferred to me. I thought that was respect. It was not. It was fear. They feared my power. They feared what I could do to them. And I confused that fear with something I had earned. I carried that confusion home. My children were quiet at dinner. I thought that meant they were well behaved. My wives stopped arguing with me. I thought that meant they agreed. People laughed at my jokes at parties. I thought that meant I was charming. None of it was real. They were all just managing me. The way you manage a storm. You don't argue with a storm. You don't tell a storm it's wrong. You just close the windows and wait for it to pass. My daughter Rebecca, she was the one who tried the longest. She tried for decades to have a real relationship with me. She'd call me and tell me about her life, about her work, about her husband, Mark, and every time I would find something to correct, some piece of advice she hadn't asked for, some judgment I couldn't hold back. When she married Mark, I told her she was making a mistake. He was a good man, I'll give him that, but he was an electrician. My daughter, the daughter of a federal judge, was marrying an electrician. I didn't say anything at the wedding. I didn't have to. My face said it for me. Rebecca told me later that the look I gave during the ceremony almost ruined the day. I told her she was imagining things. For 11 years, I peppered every conversation with little verdicts about Mark. His career wasn't ambitious enough. Their house was too small. They were spending too much on vacations instead of saving. I was right about some of it, if you want to know the truth. Mark did make some financial mistakes. They did buy a house they couldn't quite afford. But here's what I learned too late. You can be right and still be wrong. You can have the correct facts and deliver them in a way that destroys everything. Being right without being kind is just cruelty with a diploma. 9 years ago, I told Rebecca that Mark was going to ruin her financially. I had data. I had projections. I practically submitted a brief. She listened to the whole thing, and then she said something I hear every single night when the house goes quiet. She said, "Dad, I didn't call to be judged. I called because I missed you." And I said, "God forgive me." I said, "I'm not judging you. I'm stating facts." That was the last real conversation we had. She didn't yell. She didn't slam the phone. She just said, "Okay, Dad," in a voice I'd never heard from her, flat, empty, like a door closing very softly. And that was it. 9 years. The third thing. The people you love don't leave the day you're wrong. They leave the day they realize you'll never let them be right. This is the one I need you to hear. Really hear. My son, Thomas. He was not an easy child. He was emotional, creative, unfocused. Everything I wasn't and couldn't understand. He wanted to be a musician. I told him that wasn't a career, that was a hobby. He wanted to travel. I told him to get a real job first. He wanted my approval, and I gave him my assessment instead. We argued about everything: his hair, his friends, his grades, his choices, and I won every argument, every single one. Because I was smarter and more articulate, and I had 30 years of courtroom experience in how to make someone feel small with words. He stopped calling in 2013. I don't even remember what the last argument was about. I've tried. I've gone over it in my mind 1,000 times, lying in bed at night in this house where the only voice is mine, trying to remember what was so important that I couldn't just let my son be right about something. I can't remember. Whatever it was, I'm sure I won. Thomas died in 2019. Heart attack. He was 48. His wife called to tell me. She was kind about it, which made it worse. She said he had been thinking about calling me. Thinking about it. My son spent his last years thinking about calling his father and deciding not to, because he knew what would happen. He knew I would turn whatever he said into a closing argument. He knew I would find something to correct, something to rule on, something to win. I didn't go to the funeral, not because I wasn't welcome. His wife said I could come. I didn't go because I didn't deserve to. What right did I have to grieve a relationship I had destroyed? What right did I have to stand there and weep over a son I had spent 20 years judging instead of loving? That's the verdict I rendered on myself, and there is no appeal. I want to tell you about the night I understood what I had done. Not intellectually. I understood intellectually for years. I mean the night I felt it, in my body, in my chest. It was last November, a Tuesday. I had eaten dinner alone, chicken and rice, the same thing I eat most nights because I only know how to cook 4 things and I'm too proud to learn more. There's that word again. Proud. I was cleaning the plate and I dropped a glass. It shattered on the kitchen tile. And I stood there looking at the pieces. And I started to cry. Not about the glass. About the sound. Do you know what it's like to drop a glass in an empty house? The sound is enormous. It echoes off the walls and then it stops. And the silence that rushes in afterward is worse than the breaking. It's a silence that has weight. It presses down on you, It fills the rooms and the hallways, and it sits in the chairs where people used to sit. I sank down onto the kitchen floor. I'm 87 years old, and I lowered myself onto the tile with glass all around me, and I cried like I haven't cried since I was a boy. I cried for Catherine, who just wanted to tell a story without being corrected. I cried for Diane, who just wanted her opinions to matter in her own home. I cried for Rebecca, who just wanted a father instead of a judge. And I cried for Thomas, my boy, my son who died without hearing me say I was sorry, who died still waiting for his father to say, just once, you were right and I was wrong. I sat on that floor for a long time. My hip ached, my back ached. I could feel the cold tile through my trousers, and I thought about all the sentences I had handed down from the bench, all those lives I had shaped with my words. And I realized that the harshest sentence I ever imposed was on myself. Solitary confinement, permanent, no possibility of parole. That night I didn't sleep. I walked through the house, all 4 bedrooms, the study, the living room no one lives in, the dining room where no one dines. I touched the walls. I stood in Thomas's old bedroom. It still has his bookshelf. I never changed it. There's a guitar pick on the shelf. I picked it up and held it, and I could feel the edges pressing into my palm, and I squeezed until it hurt, because the pain was better than the nothing. I said out loud to an empty room, I'm sorry, Tom. And the house absorbed it the way it absorbs everything, silently, without judgment, which is more grace than I ever showed anyone. Here's what took me 87 years to understand, and I need you to hear it, because it sounds simple, and it's not. I spent my whole life believing that the truth was the most important thing, that being correct was the highest virtue, that if you had the right answer, you had an obligation, a duty, to deliver it. I built a career on that belief. I built an identity on it. And it is wrong. The truth is not the most important thing. Connection is. I'm not saying the truth doesn't matter. I'm a judge. Of course it matters. But truth without tenderness is just a weapon. Facts without compassion are just ammunition. And if you fire that ammunition at the people closest to you, eventually they will leave the room. They will leave the building. They will leave your life. I thought I was in the business of truth. I was actually in the business of control. Every correction was control. Every verdict at the dinner table was control. Every time I said, actually that's not quite right, what I was really saying was, I am the authority here. I decide what's true. Your version doesn't count. You don't win an argument with someone you love. You survive it. And if you keep surviving enough of them, pretty soon there's nobody left to argue with. The courtroom is empty. The gavel comes down, and the sound just echoes and echoes and echoes. So I'm talking to you now, and I think I know who you are. You're the one in the relationship who's always right. You're the one with the better vocabulary, the sharper logic, the quicker mind. You're the one who wins. And you're so used to winning that you don't notice what it's costing. Your wife said something at dinner last night and you corrected her. Your husband made a decision and you told him why it was wrong. Your mother called with advice and you explained patiently and thoroughly why she was mistaken. You weren't mean about it. You were reasonable. You were factual. You were right. And somewhere in the other room, someone you love is a little quieter than they were before, a little more careful with their words, a little less likely to share what they're thinking. You won't notice today. You might not notice this year. But one morning, you're going to wake up in a very quiet house, And you're going to realize that you trained every person you love to stop talking to you. If you have a daughter who still calls you, answer the phone and listen. Don't advise. Don't correct. Don't improve. Just listen. You have no idea how rare it is for someone to still want to talk to you. Don't make them regret it. If you have a son who's making choices you don't agree with, let him. Let him be wrong. Let him fail. Let him figure it out. And when he calls you afterward, don't say, "I told you so." Say, "I'm here." Those 2 words are worth more than every correct opinion you've ever had. If there's someone you haven't spoken to because of a fight you won, I'm asking you to lose. Pick up the phone and lose. Say you're sorry, even if you weren't wrong. Say you miss them even if they started it. Lose the argument. Win the person. I can't do that anymore. It's too late for me. But it's not too late for you. I'm 87 years old. I served on the federal bench for 34 years. I was never reversed on appeal. I was right about my first wife's flaws. I was right about my second wife's spending. I was right about my daughter's husband. I was right about my son's career. I was right about everything and I have nothing. That's the verdict. That's the final ruling. A lifetime of being correct. And the sentence is silence. Permanent, unappealable silence. If I could reduce everything I've learned to one sentence, it would be this. Being right is easy. Being kind is what matters. And if you have to choose, and you will have to choose more often than you think, choose kind. Choose kind every single time. Because nobody sits alone at 87 wishing they'd won more arguments.
I'm not going to tell you I've found peace. That would be a lie. And I've done enough lying to myself. I have not found peace. I have found something smaller, quieter. I have found a way to get through the days without drowning. I go to the park. Every morning, 9 o'clock. I sit on the same bench. I feed the birds, sparrows mostly. They don't care that I was a federal judge. They don't care that I was right about everything. They just want the bread. There's another old man who sits 3 benches down. We've never spoken. But last week, he nodded at me when I sat down, and I nodded back. And that small thing, 2 old men acknowledging each other's existence, it was the most human contact I'd had in weeks. And it didn't require me to be right about anything.
And now I sit in a 4-bedroom house where the only voice I hear is my own. I won. This is what winning looks like. Is that what you want? Put down your pride before it puts down everyone around you. Call someone you love. Not to be right, just to be there. That's all I've got. I hope you're smarter than I was.